They say that love is blind. In her case, she wished it was. Here's a look at NECA Toys. Universal Monsters, The Bride of Frankenstein, Ultimate Frankenstein's Monster with Chair. Frankenstein's monster lives. Recreate iconic scenes from the 1935 sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein, with this deluxe set. NECA's 7-inch scale ultimate action figure features new sculpts to reflect Boris Karloff's second appearance as the monster, as well as a restraining chair complete with wrist shackles and real chains. Accessories also include a loaf of bread, mug, bowl, and interchangeable heads and hands. Comes in display-friendly window box packaging with opening front flap. Poor Frankie's been trying to find love, and his love's been trying to find the door. Just before we get a closer look, though, at the brand new Bride of Frankenstein. Frankenstein with chair, although you don't see a chair right now. You'll see in a second. First, I'd like to thank the folks over at NECA that did provide the sample we could have a look at. It is right now a pre-order over on their site for $59.99. Since the time of doing this review as well, NECA has announced that they're planning to do a black and white version of the Bride of Frankenstein, though it will not come included with the chair. That being said, though, the figure is going to stand at about 8 inches in height, or the Bride of Frankenstein stands at 20 centimeters tall. As for monsters, well, we did get many, if you consider that is 3 to be many. The mold that you're looking at right now has been used 2 other times. The obvious one is the colorized that you're looking at right now. There's also one that's been released in the black and white, the B&W release. And there's also as well the glow-in-the-dark Remco version of Frankenstein's monster. While the mold's been moved around a lot, surprisingly, not a lot of the mold's been moved over to this version of Frankenstein. In fact, the only thing I'm really seeing that looks identical to one another is probably the tops of the thighs, the lower legs, while the top of its trunks, for example, and his boots are completely brand new sculpts. We're going to get down to the horrific details in a second. Obviously, if you're going to be talking about the Bride of Frankenstein, you're going to be wanting to talk about his bride. Bringing in, of course, the colorized version of the Bride of Frankenstein, when we do eventually get the black and white release of this guy, which I think is slated to release in January of 2025, then, of course, I'll be bringing in the black and white to be displayed with that version of the monster. Now, seeing that the colorized version of Frankenstein's monster does, in fact, come included with a restraining chair just right over here. I think right over here, for the black and white release in 2025, they could have included a tabletop. After all, the monster's sitting down for a meal. It'd like to be at least a place where you can actually store and display all those various things. Like, for example, the figure comes included with a bowl of soup. No spoon to be found anywhere, guys. This guy sips solely from the rim. You can see, in fact, it actually looks like there's a little bit of dirt on the end of this. I think it's just the way it came off the mold like this. I'm not sure really what kind of soup this would be. A pea soup, perhaps? I hope it certainly isn't French onion soup. I can't stand French onion soup. A good pea soup, though, from time to time, especially on a cold winter's day. Yeah, sign me up for that. Figure also comes included with a big loaf of bread. No, realistically, no human being should be sitting down for this size of loaf of bread, even if it's going to be something you'd be dipping inside the soup. But the loaf of bread, for what it is actually quite impressive. I'm surprised that I'm actually spending so much time praising NECA Toys for sculpting such a good, solid loaf of bread. I mean, it does have a crust on the end. I mean, short of just having a little bit of butter, you need to slather this thing up with a little bit of butter. That looks like a pretty impressive looking loaf of bread. Of course, he does have hands for holding all these things. Frankenstein does have these gripping hands, so you can take the loaf of bread. You kind of have to just really wedge them in there. He holds it just okay, depending, of course, how he really wants to eat the meal. And then he also comes included with a mug. Now, the thing with the mug, though, is that you don't really have a proper hand. I suppose you could really use the relaxed hands, or you could really just kind of cup 2 of the fingers at least inside the handle of the mug and have the monster displayed that way as well. Speaking, I guess, of the other hands, the figure does also come included with this smoke hand. Smoke. One of probably the only few times we're actually getting ourselves a NECA release where the figure does come included with a cigarette. I'm trying to think also as well. Didn't Dutch, I believe Dutch from the Predator line, also came included with a smoke as well. But Frankenstein's monster does come included with this. And then, of course, he does come included with decent enough head sculpts that are really suitable for those specific scenes. Like, for example, he does have a defaulted head that is pretty much just a more neutral expression. But then he has this head, which I think is the best one for the smoke hand. Smoke! Good! Of course, we will be swapping out these things, though, in a second. The figure also comes included with the shock of realizing that the person that's been assigned to him as a bride finds him absolutely repulsive. Stellar-looking sculpts on all of these, by the way. And by the way, though, the head sculpt that we start things with when you get this guy out of the packaging is just a neutral expression. One of the notable things, though, about the Bride of Frankenstein Boris Karloff makeup is that if you look at his hairline, the hairline continues to recede. It happens to all of us. The coloring, as you can see, though, is a lot grayer this instance as well, and he has a lot more staples on the sides of his face, whereas this one he only would have had it on the top, still, though, has the bolts on the sides of his neck. Really, really like this head sculpt quite a lot. We're going to get, again, to comparing the two bodies in a second. If you did, though, want to swap out the head sculpts, say you want to go with the shrieking one, or like kind of, oh, she doesn't like me, oh, you can go with this one. Or again, if you want to display him with this head sculpt, you know what? We'll go with this one for at least right now. We're going to hold on to the torso for dear life, just kind of wiggle the head back and forth until it finally frees itself from the post, and then take the head that we want to use and just pop it in place. Just as a side detail, though, just before we start putting heads on tops of necks, I want to show you, though, they spent just as much time sculpting an area that eventually will be covered, really, by a head sculpt. Again, we're just going to pop this in place. Now, one of the initial ideas I was kind of thinking prior to knowing that NECA Toys was going to be releasing a black and white version of Frankenstein's monster, I thought to myself, you know, if they had found a way to have the neck be removable, like say, for example, each of the heads came with each one neck, you just pop off everything, you could then pop off the forearms, and then they could have given you black and white things that you could then have swapped out. So essentially you would buy then one figure, and you can choose which looks you want to have. B&W, black and white, or a colorized version. Obviously, NECA has already thought well in advance. They are releasing, again, that black and white release in January. Nice looking head sculpt, though, on this one. I just want to make sure I've got it all the way on there. The only thing I would say, though, is that the coloring of the neck doesn't quite jive to the coloring that they did to the face. Again, whether you want to go with this head sculpt, whether you want to go with this head sculpt, you can also go with this one as well. The fantastic paint work on all the three, though. Of course, this whole time I've been talking away and spending some time, of course, Frankenstein. The one thing that you probably have been seeing this whole time is obviously his restraining chair, which just happens to be over here. There was some assembly that was required, not the most extensive of assembly. Essentially what it is just the block, the stone block that has then the backing. This is all one piece when you get out of the packaging, and then you've got the flooring that basically you take the top half, and then you're going to fit them inside these grooves. Now I will say, the few times that I've already done this, you may already start to see that there's stress developing here on the plastic. It at least is one of those grips that once you snap it in place, it's secure enough, but then it does seem like you can easily remove it afterwards. So if you're somebody that down the road decides, I want to make sure I've got that all the way on there. There we go. There. Whew. Once you get it all in there, even though it was probably a little unnerving of a snap sound, once you get that in place, down the road, if you find yourself running out of space, it seems to be the kind of base that you can remove it. Although you probably have already seen, it starts to develop that stress mark, though, between the clip and essentially where that's plugging in place. Yeah, you can see it right there starting to develop. The chair itself does also have some shackles. Now, if you're looking at this, let's go back to this first of all. So you've got the belts here that run to the top. Now, they don't actually connect to anything. If you're looking at the back of them, they're basically just dangling chains. So good is the sculpt even on the back of this as well. It looks like real wood. Again, you've got the loose chains that dangle on the back. Now, these are cold to the touch. I wonder if these are actually made of metal. Now, they said real metal, real chains. If real chains then translates to real metal chains, nice work on NECA's part. But basically, you've got these heavy chains that are draping on the back of this. Then, if you look at it from the front, you've got the restraining collar, so Frankie's head is going to go in between here. And then you've got a chain that runs across with a big, large bolt lock on the side. I guess that would be a key lock. This doesn't need to be removed at all. In fact, you don't even have to worry at all of trying to detach this in order to get Frankie up there. All you really have to do is worrying about getting Frankenstein's legs bent. You can bend the legs, you're going to bend the knees. And then when you kind of get him in a good situated position, all you really then have to do is take Frankenstein's head and whoop, slide it up the top there. And pretty much he's then good to go. The only thing you really want to do is obviously restrain his arms. So they also include as well these long chains that bolt then to the front. So you've got a hole here, you got a hole here. All right, let me show you. You got a hole here, and you got a hole here. You're going to take this part that has the larger looplet, and that's going to just, doing this all while holding Frankenstein, make sure he's not falling. You're going to bolt this in place. You don't even really have to push far down either. These actually slide fairly easy into the holes. In fact, they're even easier as well to remove. And once that's in place, the only thing left that you really have to do is then you have to take Frankenstein's hands off. Because what you get is, on the ends of these, you get these little hand pieces. Now, these would fit over his wrist, but for obvious reasons, they're not going to be able to fit over his hands. If they fit over his hand, that was poor planning on the part, because obviously Frankenstein would just be able to slide his hands out of it. So what you'll have to do is take his hand off. Then you'll take the collared piece, the cuff piece, I should say, and then you're just going to plug that in place, take the hand, and then just put it back where you found it. Please put it back where you found it. Just twist that in place, and now Frankenstein is shackled, at least on the one side. And then you simply would just rinse and repeat the steps on the other side, and then Frankenstein is shackled, and, well, he's obviously not going to be going anywhere. If you've seen the movie, you probably already know he goes other places as well. So we're going to go ahead and actually just detach everything. We're going to slide Frankie back off from the chair. We'll just leave the chair off to the side so you have at least something to look at while this guy continues to talk. Put the hand back in place. And seeing as I also was talking about the hands earlier, let's go back to the smoke can. Where did I put the smoke can? Do I have it over here? I hope I have it over here. There it is. There it is right there. If you guys did want to see what that looks like, I'm just going to also remove the hand. And we'll just plug this in place. Luckily, it's one of those accessories that they thought well enough in advance that instead of trying to worry about getting the smoke actually in between his fingers and his thumb, NECA thought, you know what? If we were buying these figures for ourselves, we wouldn't want to have to worry about having to try to fit the cigarette in between his fingers and his thumb for the risk that this thing is going to fall off. So instead of that, what they did just simply instead was they molded the cigar or the smoke actually in between his fingers and his thumb. So that's not going anywhere, and you can always have it then on display with Frankenstein. Getting, though, again, a closer look at the head sculpt, I know we already spent a little bit of time talking about it. Just, you know, again, between, though, the two Frankensteins that we have gotten, because, again, like we've gotten this one, and we've gotten, again, this release from before, I always was a bigger fan of the black and white release because I thought it made a lot of the details pop just a lot more. Between, though, the two head sculpts, I feel like I'm kind of gravitating a little bit more to liking the Bride of Frankenstein look of Frankenstein just a little bit more. Just because, first of all, I like more the head sculpt that they sculpted here. I think there's a lot more personality, maybe perhaps to his face. There's just a whole lot more going on. Now, when it comes to sculpting for his bodies, you may already be able to see that there isn't really a lot that gets shared between the two. I would say if anything, the jacket is obviously a brand new sculpt, but perhaps maybe the torso underneath is one thing that's shared between the two, because this jacket never really needs to open. I was, though, surprised to see, if you look at the top here of where his belt would be, or I guess his belt wouldn't be there, but if you see these buttons, the buttons, though, are nowhere to be found on the original release, if you're looking behind the curtains. So it looks like they have sculpted a brand new top of the torso, or top section here of his waist. The legs seem to be, though, the same, as well as his lower legs. One thing, though, they did correct when it came to the Bride of Frankenstein is not making maybe Boris look so much like he was walking around in stilted shoes. So while the original one would have had clearly very much an indication here where he's got platform boots, the new version of Frankenstein, as you can see, smooths those over so it looks like it's just one continued piece of shoe. Of course, on the bottoms of this, the figure does have still pegos on the bottoms of his feet. But again, like, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot that has been carried over from one mold to the other. Of course, for the articulation on this guy, if you're familiar with that Frankenstein, then you're familiar then with this Frankenstein when it comes to his levels of posability. First, the head's going to be on a ball joint, so it allows the head to rotate all the way around. I realize, though, I don't have that head all the way on there. Head's going to look down, the head's going to look up, and you can also move it back and forth. In addition, though, to that, and this is one of the reasons why I was kind of thinking, you know, had they released black and white parts to this Frankenstein, you could then have just popped the neck off, popped the head off, removed the arms, and then essentially just swapped things out with black and white parts, and then you could have gotten essentially a 2-for-1. So instead, what they've done instead is they're going to be releasing a standalone black and white release of him. Anyways, what I was saying, though, is that he does have a ball joint here. He does have, though, a ball joint at the base of the neck. And between those two, there's a fair bit of freedom that Frankie has. As for his shoulders, now they come out. They don't fully come out at 90 degrees without a little bit of forcing. They get eventually up there. They get to where they need to go. But you do have to, I find with at least this figure, the shoulder joints were really tight. And that's not a bad thing at all. Arms rotate all the way around. You can do, yes, that on both sides as well. He now has torn sleeves. The original one never had that, but there's still a single hinge on the elbow that allows the forearm to rotate back and forth. Smoke, good. You can also rotate his hand all the way around. His upper torso is still going to be on a ball joint. That fully rotates. The legs do split out still, easy and fine. You can move the legs forward. You can move them back. There is, though, a single hinge on the knee, a rotation in the lower leg, and of course, still like the original one, there's the ankle pivot back and forth, and a decent enough ankle rocker there as well. Yeah, really like this one a lot. And, you know, again, like looking at this essentially, when I was first seeing this online, I was kind of asking myself this question, like, how many of these parts from this version of Frankenstein, because somewhat ironic, the fact that you're kind of using parts from other bodies and you're creating yourself a brand new monster. Funny though enough, they didn't actually use nearly enough the parts that I thought they were going to be doing. I mean, it looks, again, like this part section of his belt is completely, I keep calling it a belt. This section, the top of his pants, is very different than what we got in the original release. Again, it's only really, it seems to be the thighs, the lower legs, the boots are completely different, completely brand new arms. And of course, the obvious thing is the fact that they have a brand new, different head sculpt as well. Bringing back in the bride, and I realize now, when I should have brought in the bride, I should have brought her in with a screaming face. I think perhaps if she's not looking back, I think she probably will be okay. Still, when it comes to displaying this guy on the shelf, I'm going to likely display this guy with, of course, the restraining chair. When eventually we do get, though, that black and white treatment of him in January of next year, then I'm going to probably have that one displayed with the black and white Bride of Frankenstein, and then having her, of course, screaming at poor Frankenstein. If that's the case, then, of course, I'm going to bring back that head sculpt. Oh, come on. Love the head sculpts on all three of these. You probably would be also asking as well, could you use this head for this neck here? And it seems to be the case that you can, although with obviously the way that his outfit gets a little bit more torn and tattered in the follow-up sequel, I'm not really sure why you would need to start to swap the heads with the original Frankenstein we got from before. Now, out of his chair with a smoke in one hand and a tall mug of drink in the other. That mug, by the way, fits fine in his hand. I don't know why I was struggling so much to try to get him. He was actually trying to hold it like he was holding a teacup. But no, that hand is fine for holding not only the loaf of bread, which again, some incredible work. Can I just say this? Some fine work on NECA's sculptor's part to sculpt the bread as realistic as they did. It's one of the best loaves of bread. Probably is the only loaf of bread we've ever got with a figure, but some fine work though on NECA's part. The figure does come included, as you can see, with the restraining chair. You can choose for yourself if you want to have the figure actually sitting in the chair or not. Now, obviously, though, as mentioned, the black and white release that we're going to be getting in January is going to basically have all the following accessories that you see except for the chair. So if you want to get your hands on the chair, the only obvious way that you're going to be able to get it is getting this release here. Between the restraining chair, the lab table that we did get from before, and then the recently looked at Remco version of the Monsterizer, there's a lot of cool dioramas going on for this dead guy. I think between this guy and the original release of Frankenstein's monster, I think I like this one just a little bit more. There's a lot more personality going on in this face, whether you choose to go with this face or the other two that the figure comes included with. As of right now, it shows as a pre-order on NECA's site, but I think you can also find this one right now in stores or in other online sites. Big thank you once again to the folks over at NECA Toys that did provide this sample, the brand new Universal Monsters Bride of Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster, and his restraining chair. Yes. You guys did enjoy this video? I hope so. If you did, why not do it a solid? Throw it a like. You guys want to stick around for more so? I hope so. Hit that subscribe, turn on that bell, and why don't you come back? As always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.